In today's world, a child's life is increasingly shaped by screens, swipes, and endless streams of algorithmic content. Children have never had more access to ideas, information, entertainment, but are they better off? While technology connects us, it can also drive us apart. It entertains and it distracts, it educates, but can also misinform. Today we ask, has technology transformed childhood or hijacked it? In this episode of Doha Debates, we're joined by a panel of experts, global thinkers, each with their own take on this issue.
Most digital technology today is not given to young people for them to express what they want. It's used on young people to get them to think, feel, and behave in certain ways.
Digital technologies can be a critical gateway to larger freedoms and self-actualization if we invest in the well-being of our digital spaces. So it absolutely is a positive life force for majority of youth.
Digital technology has hijacked childhood. It's made it unrecognizable from the way that it used to be.
Well, the reality is most people's fears about social media fit into a moral panic, and the evidence right now suggests that for the most part, social media has had very little impact on kids' well-being at all.
Their perspectives will be explored and questioned in a Majlis-style debate, grounded in understanding and a search for truth. Watching over all of this will be a group of university students and recent graduates. They come from different universities in Qatar Foundation's Education City and beyond, and have been preparing for this debate.
I think we've reached such a point of addiction to social media that even for me, watching a long YouTube video essay feels like I'm cleansing myself.
These platforms design it so you stay on for the longest.
You start looking for validation on social media as a young girl. You go on all of these social media platforms and you behave in a specific way.
I don't really think social media is the cause of that. I think it's actually a death of community and a lack of structure in their lives. The reason why they go to Andrew Tate and they go to this alt-right pipeline is that they don't have anyone there in their actual real lives to be around.
A lot of parents don't understand social media. If you ask my aunt what Instagram means, what I see on Instagram, she will not know.
After our guests finish their debate, the students will reflect and deliberate before returning with their own insights, ready to challenge, agree, or offer entirely new perspectives. I'm Imran Garda, and this is Doha Debates. All right, really looking forward to this. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us. I want to start with you, Douglas Rushkoff. What is the ideal childhood, and does it include screens and devices?
I don't know if there's an ideal childhood. Certainly we could talk about what are the conditions for an ideal childhood, and that would just be a community of people who have your best interests at heart. And I can say that the people who are designing and developing social media aren't thinking first about, is this platform benefiting the child? There was a time when the people making social media companies were thinking of them as ways of connecting people to other people, making it easy for people to make websites and link to each other. Even Mark Zuckerberg, when he started Facebook, was thinking, how am I going to help college boys find college girls for romantic relationships?
Sure.
No, it's true. It was a dating site.
Yeah.
I mean, they're ranking them on a scale of 1 to 10.
Eventually, the people who had invested in these platforms wanted more money from them. The billions of dollars the companies were making doing their social function wasn't increasing fast enough. And that's when they had to find ways to really use the platforms to extract more attention. And that was through less healthy means.
Childhood to me is a moment of learning, of being, without thinking about what others do or think. That being taken away, that very precious moment of humanity from children, is very crucial, and it shouldn't be easily manipulated or exploited for selfish reasons.
Okay, so we'll sort of get more into the methodology of it all and how it's designed, but I want to ask Payal, Arora, this critical take on those at the very top in charge of these platforms that all of us are invested in, whether we like it or not, are they only looking for the bottom line? And do they not have people's best interests at heart?
I think we're looking in the wrong place. Let me just get this out there is that absolutely, I don't think many people out there are big fans of big tech currently, right? So it's very easy to hate them, and they absolutely are driven by profit, which is also not a debatable aspect. But the thing is, at this point, we are disproportionately giving overemphasis on the power of platforms and their intent, and we are looking less on the creative agencies of young people and what they make of these platforms, because there's no such thing as a done technology. All technologies are in the making and always be in the making. And how are they in the making is because they're engaging with young people, right? I'm a media anthropologist, and I've been looking at, how young people use these digital devices and media across from Brazil, India, China, Namibia. And one thing I can tell you confidently is that they actually absolutely love these tools despite the harms and risks. And so I do believe there's a generational divide. I do believe you're projecting a lot of our anxieties on platform affordances and their sort of strategies and structures, and less attention on what these young people are doing and why are they doing so. Because much of the mental distress is stemming from offline contexts. They are experiencing gender violence, displacement, extreme poverty. And so in relation to these contexts, they see digital media as much more of a pathway to self-actualization.
My problem, of course, isn't with the fact that she brings it up. Obviously, it's important. I'm someone from the global south. I care a lot about this. But I think this kind of, lazily invoking the global south and then pretending to speak on its behalf, that kind of really riled me up.
I want to take the initial point that you made and ask Jean Twenge this idea that it depends on who you ask and depends on the context of whoever these kids are and where they are. So is there a fundamental difference? So for example, your research, is there a fundamental difference between those you study in the United States, North America, even, we say maybe the West, versus others in countries that Payal has mentioned?
When it comes to trends in mental health and the links between, say, depression, anxiety, and time spent on social media, no, there's not really that much of a difference. So in the PISA data set, for example, 15 and 16-year-olds around the world, including in the global south, so say in Latin America and Brazil, Chile, Argentina, we see the exact same trends that we see in the United States of adolescents since about 2012 being much more likely to say that they feel lonely.
She makes a very good point. Happens in Latin America all the time.
It's in 2012. It's been literally a decade.
I would say just increase more.
So I've been working with these big data sets, mostly big surveys of teens. I started, looking at the data from the US, and all of a sudden, teens started to say that they felt lonely, that they felt left out. Symptoms of depression started to go up. And those things had been trending either stable or downward until about 2012, and then all of a sudden they shot upward. And at first, I really had absolutely no idea why that was happening. It was a big mystery. I thought maybe it's a blip, who knows? It was misaligned with any economic trends, and then it kept going. And then we got international data. And by the time we got to 2019, right before the COVID pandemic, teen depression had doubled. So, and self-harm went up and suicide rates went up. And then we started to see it internationally as well.
So are you rolling the dice with your kids' health if you give them unfettered access to devices?
I think it's very clear that you are, because that's what parents want to know. And that's the essence. What they want to know is it safe for my 10-year-old to spend 5 hours a day on Instagram? And I think it's abundantly clear that that's not safe.
Okay, then don't give them the iPad. Okay.
Both sides accuse the other of cherry picking. Christopher Ferguson, is childhood being hijacked
Yeah.
by tech. And when we say tech, you can slice it in multiple
Sure.
ways, the devices, the different platforms.
Right. So I have a very different view of the data than Gene has, and this, of course, is a source of our debate. So there actually was a study that came out 2 years ago that did look at these like cross-country comparisons, and it found actually the countries are all over the place. There is not this consistent pattern in mental disease, for instance. This was based on the global burden of disease study,
Which
essentially.
doesn't have actual data. It has estimates.
It has the
It
actual
has
recordings
estimates
of
which are wildly off the actual data.
Why don't I finish the sentence before we actually get into the back and forth here?
I love this woman. So I was like feeling a connection with her because I have seen other teens, other like children suffer from this. So I think everything she said came from like a realistic like perspective.
No, so it's actually based on the actual diagnoses, and it shows this wide heterogeneity in terms of the actual outcome. So, a lot of countries in Eastern Europe and in Asia and in Africa do not show any evidence of this increase in mental health disorders.
Because you can't even say you're depressed.
I think the stigma is there.
You can also look at suicide data across nationally, and so there is not this pattern of cross-national patterns in suicide, that most countries are staying fairly stable, some countries are going up, some countries are going down. The US is one of the countries where we're seeing an increase in teen suicide.
The debate is not even in social media, it's like with communities in general. Like those are more collective societies.
Collective societies, yeah,
Like
true.
America's a very individual society.
It's important to point out that's not just for teens, however, that the suicide rate for middle-aged adults is going up.
Okay, so then it's making us all sick.
Well, but you would expect to see a different pattern if this was like high-tech adopting people should see like a different sort of effect from like low-tech adopting individuals. And if you actually look at like CDC data, when you ask kids, why are you depressed? So the kids who actually are the most depressed, most anxious, what they report is, generally speaking, is that their own families, it's problems in their families and in their schools is the main thing that they're depressed about. They do not report that, that their use of cell phones or social media is a prime driver.
Kids are also
Yeah,
not
but
that
like-
self-aware as
But
well.
he sees
Let's
everyone
factor that
depressed
into
for the
play.
same reason, so he assumes he's depressed.
I was like, yes, finally, there is someone that is actually like acknowledging like, hey, it's all about the family. The family is the support system.
In terms of time spent, because Gene did mention the time spent things, across studies, again, you do find differences between studies. We do not find evidence that time spent on social media
What
is
about
predictive.
our dopamine hits?
That's
Dopamine
largely like a pseudoscience kind.
Tell me why.
Dopamine release is an absolutely natural thing. So for the people who are watching this today and going, oh boy, look, they're going to argue, this is great, they're experiencing a dopamine release as well. If you read a good book that you're enjoying, if you eat a slice of pizza, the release of dopamine in the brain is a very normal process.
How many kids are taking a bite of pizza every 5 minutes for 16 hours a day?
Well, I mean, but probably not too many. Yeah, absolutely. But this is true for if you're enjoying your day at all. If you're reading a book, do you enjoy reading a book?
I do sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. So
Depends
while
on the
you're
book.
reading a book,
Yeah.
that could take hours to do that.
Yeah, but again, it's this it's somebody else curating how you should feel and regulating your own emotions, especially when you're a child.
Yeah.
Having that access to this perpetually. Do you believe there should be sort of no guardrails at all?
Well, I mean, and the way you put it sounds very scary, but it sounds like, well, what is the actual data to support that kind of a narrative, right? And right now, we just don't have that kind of
The
data.
suicide rate, great place to start. From 2010 to 2019, among middle-aged people in the US, it increased 5%. That's it. You know how much it increased for 10 to 14-year-olds? It doubled. That's a big, big, big difference. If you look at, say, the family problems, yes, absolutely, that can be a problem, but that hasn't increased over time. We have no evidence that child abuse has gone up, say, since 2010 when we got the big rise in teen depression.
What about financial problems for families and isolation between families, parents, and kids? Maybe that could be a problem of isolation as well, right?
I wonder why these families are isolated.
What about the parents being depressed? From the best data that we've got, middle-aged parents, their depression rates haven't changed at all. Among their teenage children, they have doubled. And we'll just have to agree to disagree. There is really, really consistent evidence for a rise in depressive symptoms and loneliness in international data. For the suicide rates, there is more variation, but if you go and zero in on teen girls and young women, it's much more consistent.
I actually like the fact that she really brought up how women deal with these issues and how what we face, because you had, these other guests. No one really talked about how many issues, body issues, mental health issues, body dysmorphia. No one for 1 second talked about how plastic surgery is so correlated to social media.
Do you accept Payal's point that there is an emancipatory aspect for a lot of people who are constrained in their real day-to-day lives offline, and they find a liberation online, connecting with a community, getting to be themselves when maybe they're constrained in certain places? Do you accept that?
Well, I think there's a number of issues there. So one is, how many hours a day of use are we talking about here? Are we talking about an hour a day where you go on, you find that community, but then you still have plenty of time for sleep and going outside and exercise and being with friends face to face? That's not as much of the problem. The problem is the excessive use. And when it's 5, 6, 7 hours a day, that's where you see the worst mental health outcomes by far. And the problem is those algorithms, that's what they're pushing for. They're pushing for those extreme levels of use. And Gallup for US teens found in 2023 that the average teen now spends about 5 hours a day. So that average is being pushed into that area where it's really problematic. It's compulsive. And it is by design. I mean, TikTok, the companies admit to this, is the other fascinating thing. TikTok said that compulsive use is baked in to the platform.
Douglas, it's interesting. You're an early tech pioneer. Is that a part of the story? And by design, has it been created as this sort of attention casino?
Yeah, I mean, I would say yes and no. I mean, the geeks and nerds who connected with each other over the early networks I think they were using them in a healthy way. I mean, yeah, I mean, some of us use them too much or too many hours, but especially if we were antisocial types or nervous at school. But the problem was that didn't make enough money, right? So then algorithms were added into the system. So instead of just reading the feeds and notes and posts of people you know, the algorithm decides which posts are you going to read from among the people you subscribe to and from other people. The algorithm is there not to necessarily bring you what you're looking for, but to induce a more addictive state. Back before algorithms, I actually wrote books agreeing with Christopher. I wrote a book called that created the term screenagers, and I invented the term digital natives. And what I was arguing was that kids raised on digital platforms are going to speak the language like natives. And to us adults, it looks all scary and strange, but the kids are going to be all right. And I really think they would have been all right if we hadn't decided, oh no, these kids are using these platforms to engage with each other, to get healthy, to exchange ideas, and they're not buying stuff. They're not staying on the platforms. They're leaving and they're playing with each other. We've got to get more use, more addictive use, and we started to create algorithms to do that, and we tune them differently. The American TikTok algorithm is tuned differently than the Chinese one, right? The Chinese TikTok platform limits how many hours they can use it. It tries to encourage them to do their studies in school and to think nicely about their country. The American one is tuned just for engagement by any means necessary.
Yes, exactly. Algorithmic neutrality is it's foreign.
And that's when you start having bias.
And it even listens, by the way.
Engineered bias,
does, yeah.
Dr. Rushkoff, and he was speaking about it in a realistic way, right? He wasn't just saying, they're all great and let's all do TikTok content. And people forget that, we are the people that have these thoughts. We're the ones that are thinking. We're the ones that are thinking about the algorithm. We're the ones that are having these reflections. We're the ones that are going on social media breaks. We're always having these reflections. Yet no one really focused on what we are doing with our own lens, if that makes sense. I just felt like in that moment, I felt like he was the only, he was looking right through the camera and he's like, I know what you guys are thinking, right? I know what you're doing. It just felt like he saw us in that moment, right? It was like a spiritual connection.
I did want to respond to a few of Jean's points, if I may do so. If you look at CDC data, I mean, if you look at what actually predicts which teenagers report, this is self-report data, so you have to take it with some grain of salt. In terms of what predicts their suicidal ideation, for instance, the impact, the effect size, as we refer to it, for adverse childhood events. So this is things like parents who are incarcerated, parents who've committed suicide. Those effect sizes explain, in some cases, nearly 25% of the variance in suicidality, whereas social media use explains less than 1%. in most cases.
Okay, less than 1% is ridiculous. I can admit that this is like a little multifaceted and that there are multiple factors, but to say that less than 1% of depression and suicide is because of social media is ridiculous. Like, come on.
We're not asking with this research, oh, among everything, what are all of the possible causes of mental health issues? We're trying to figure out why it increased and how much the risk increases with more social media use. And that's much more clear that when you look at the risk, that those numbers are not small, that there's something that most parents would not run a risk. I mean, if you take the example of, say, 5 hours a day of social media use or 6 or 7 hours, that's where we see the worst outcomes.
Both of them are like talking in absolutes way too much because both influence the other. It creates a cycle, right? You know, you have this terrible life and you go on social media and then your life becomes worse and you go on social media more. For me, the purpose of debate or debating these sorts of issues is not so we can go, oh, wow, that was pretty deep. It's so we can actually come to some sort of solution. For me, solution comes through organization and comes through policy. So I think while as much as possible, we can stress to children, to parents, to have, safe social media usage, I think at the end of the day, if you want to change society, you have to do it structurally. Whether that's putting regulations, whether that's taking a look at why our economic system seems to incentivize all these terrible things. I think if you really want to tackle the issue, you're going to have to actually prevent it from being incentivized rather than just, doing this moral grandstanding and being like, well, you just shouldn't have been on social media.
Payal, are you convinced that there is a problem even though you're qualifying it and you're saying, well, it depends?
So I'm not a relativist. Let me just take a step back with, the ideal type, like the prescriptive scenario that, say, Jean just brought up some time back about how the healthy thing is you should go out, meet with your friends, have some fresh air. So typical parents, like, who wouldn't want that, right?
Innocence,
like, exactly,
freedom,
like
creativity.
Just get off your phones, get off your devices, go out there. So let me get granular here, right? These are very Western-driven constructs because we are so immersed in our conditions and contexts where we believe what is normal in terms of our access to the streets,
getting
the public,
fresh air,
to be able to,
Western?
Socialize is extraordinarily Western and privileged.
Tell me why.
Here's why. Let's get granular in terms of the context. Take Afghanistan, for instance, right? You're a woman or a girl in Afghanistan where you cannot go to school at all. You can't go in public space with your girlfriends. You can't actually talk to them by the Taliban law. In fact, you can't even stand next to a window because it could be, dishonorous to your family. In relation to that, so these women, their suicide rates have gone up exponentially, since Taliban took over, right? And what are they doing? They're going online. So yes, there's a high correlation. Guess what? They're spending 6 to 8 hours because they're trying to remember what it means to be a human being because they have less rights than a cat, or an animal out there. For example, we spent 4 years with Venezuelan refugees in Brazil, and I can guarantee you they are extraordinarily grateful to be on digital media because why? Refugees are dehumanized.
Dehumanized by who? People on social media. Like literally the radicalization of people in India and Myanmar to target Muslims. Like, come on, man.
My thing is the tone sounds so patronizing to like so many countries. We're like, you're so happy to be here.
Like she doesn't represent everyone, but she does represent good few.
And so what they basically look at is the digital media is a way of remembering where they come from, who they are, right? And frankly, nobody's creating work opportunities for them. So they're going on TikTok, they're going on Instagram, on YouTube, building channels because kids today don't want to be what their parents are and the grandparents. And the other thing is we have, like in Europe, I live in Europe, we have forgotten what's it like to be at war, okay? And only now we're like getting the taste of it again, whereas these people have relatively better lives. China today is much better than China a couple of decades ago.
She brought the example of China, which probably one of the countries that had the most censorship on social media apps in general.
So these teenagers, when they go online, yes, and they spend a lot of time online, is because they find it's like a finding different communities. So Indian kids are now big fans of K-pop, right? And they're consuming Korean culture.
They're all so happy to be here, Hussein. Aren't you happy to be using this social media?
I'm sure that's one part of it, but why do you centralize your argument on the global south only for that specific part? Like, the only person of color in that panel is speaking about the global south as if they're like all little kids who got new toys.
What we love to do is we dismiss, young people's agencies, and we see them in such condescending terms, like they're passive recipients of the harms and risks, and not the fact that they are able to take these platforms and repurpose, hack, and build spaces despite these. Nobody's denying these algorithms oftentimes are leveraging to, extract and to, exasperate certain kind of situations. But young people have an amazing gift to repurpose.
I kind of gave her the benefit of the doubt, but no. Went back to the same thing, the global south, the generalization, and then she started talking about this pitch perfect picture of social media.
All being affected mentally by social media.
I don't know about that.
And I
bro.
really don't like her exceptionalizing us.
I don't know
because that's
about
not
that.
what
I
it
don't
is.
think so.
Do you agree that risk is increased with this universe that children enter?
Of course, look, it's like, tell me one thing, have you fallen in love ever?
Jose Mourinho says, I prefer not to speak.
Look, anyone who falls in love, right? There's a lot of risk. There's
Right.
high risk of getting hurt. Okay, we have to recognize 90% of young people live in the global south. Majority of them are going to have arranged marriages, and they want to experience what it's like to fall in love, to have boyfriends and girlfriends, and have intimacy online.
Okay, so that's,
and they go in.
So let's
right?
ask Douglas Rushkoff. Are you changing your thesis?
No, there's different kinds of social and emotional repression in different parts of the world. In America, kids are repressed by commercialism and certain kinds of values. And for them, the risk of social media is less like the risk of falling in love than the risk of using a slot machine. And for them, there's certain dangers. I agree. If I were in a prison camp or solitary confinement, I'd rather have even Twitter from there than nothing, right? I'm going to engage, at least get out with other people. And the arguments she's making are very much like what I was arguing in the 90s and early 2000s about the possibilities with these media. It's not about are they good or bad or have they hijacked childhood or merely changed childhood. It's really what are we going to do now? How are we going to prioritize the mental and social health of young people who are using these media constantly?
Khalas, it's already here. Social media is here. It's what do we do? I like this.
I can speak in America, or at least in the West. I think it would be great if kids had one day off a week from social media just to recalibrate. Only because I don't trust my child's development to the likes of Elon Musk. I just don't.
The only person I feel like was kind of on topic was Professor Rushkoff. We're talking about childhood being taken advantage of, children being exploited. You can't entrust Elon Musk with your child because he's gonna take all the chances or all the opportunities to monetize them. And them targeting children was not unintentional. They do it on purpose and telling them that, oh, you have the moral obligation to limit it, right? And because, they were discussing solutions and they're like, oh, they should limit it. These companies don't have that incentive. They want to increase their target audience, and that would include children.
How can we trust the agency of kids and ourselves when we know that the algorithm's essentially trying to keep us hooked like this?
Absolutely. Well, the algorithm is trying to figure out what's interesting to us and give us more. I mean, absolutely, they want to keep us engaged. So I'll tell you an example from my own experience. This with Facebook is because I am a psychologist. I at one point started getting a lot of advertisements about maybe you should be in therapy. And I started wondering, what did Facebook know that I didn't know? All I need to do is hit the little button saying, I don't want to see this anymore. But this is where we get into the idea of like media literacy, is we can help kids, understand, or adults. There are plenty of adults that don't use social media well or news media or anything else well. But we can help people, young people, understand what mechanisms are there already to help them guide their own online experience.
The idea of algorithm is, yes, it is supposed to be addictive. It is supposed to bring you the content that you like to watch, right? And this is something that's completely fine because these social media platforms do tell you that, hey, I'm here for the sake of profit. So at the end of the day, you have the ability to choose what content you want to use, what content you want to see.
Like so many of us lack self-control when it comes to these applications, you know, as grown adults who should ideally be able to better navigate these apps, and yet we fall into manipulation tactics that they use. So yeah, in complete transparency, I kind of fear whether, you know, all these aspirations I have for my future children being able to control their usage is even like feasible or practical.
Unlike ads on Facebook, you can't reset the algorithm. That's actually something young people talk about a lot on TikTok, Instagram especially, that you end up in doom spirals, that you're sad one day, you get sad content, and then it just keeps going.
Yep.
Yeah.
My feed is just depressing.
And then with Instagram, another thing that happens is, say a teen girl will start looking for stuff on healthy diets and exercise. And especially if she looks at those things a little bit longer, that explore page and so on, keep feeding more and more of that content. And there are sites called pro-anorexia, that will teach young girls to do that.
She brought Pro-Ana, which is this community, right, of people that literally are tracking their meals and like fat shaming people into being skinny. And I was like, okay, so this is a practical example of social media use. The others didn't really mention that.
So I think the other problem with that argument about, okay, let's talk to kids, let's teach them digital literacy. Sure, let's talk to them. I don't have a problem with that, but it's not enough. It's not enough because of the powerful algorithms that are involved. It's not enough because there's a lot of social pressure to be on these platforms. And it's not enough because they don't have self-control. Like
Who gets to decide what is enough?
That's one of the debates that's certainly happening right now. And I think, you know, first, obviously, we have to start with parents. And yes, talking to kids, but also having some guardrails in place. I mean, we could start really simple with enforcing existing law, which at the moment isn't done. So at least in the US, there's a law that was passed in 1998 at the dawn of the internet that set 13 as the age of internet adulthood. So you can get a social media account at 13 legally. But there are 10-year-olds and 11-year-olds on TikTok and Instagram on a regular basis because that law isn't enforced, because they don't verify age. They just check a box or lie about your birthday and you're on.
How do you enforce it though? Do you start arresting kids for having...
Thank you.
How easier said than done, you know, it's one of those things.
Even if you ban phones at schools, you will go back. Family still has to put the effort and the responsibility of still banning the phone or putting some sort of regulations on social media.
So you have 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds, very underdeveloped frontal lobe. If we're talking about 20 and 21-year-olds, that's a different discussion than talking about 10, 11, 12-year-old children.
Yes. Can I just focus on the language that Jane is using? Like how these kids are being fed, how they're consuming, and how they're just like, you know, absorbing.
They're not creating what they're absorbing. They're absorbing what we create for them.
But have you seen
Like,
the way they do
talk,
it
right?
though? Yeah.
Because
you observed
I
one.
actually there's a different aspect, right? Is that young people are creating content. I was working with Ethiopians and they can't express themselves. Many of them were asylum seekers in Europe, and I met them and they were like, well, basically, you know, their story, their cultures, if you're the Oromo society, you know, you can't, it's illegal to speak about it. So they go on social media and they're like absolutely optimistic.
Where's the optimism? What social media
None of
are
this
you
is related
using?
to kids. Like she's talking about like young adults and adults.
However, our topic here is about childhood. It's not about us. It's about kids who are in their very important developmental stage where they're forming themselves in the society. They're forming their mindsets, and it really matters what they're exposed to.
I mean, I have 2 little brothers, and I'm worried about what they get exposed to on social media. And, you know, as a kid, I can say definitely, like, I was exposed to things on social media that I shouldn't have been from a very young age. And, you know, I don't think that was good for my upbringing or for my development.
But that's not the way most kids are using it. Most kids are Passive use.
Absolutely
I don't agree with that.
Absolutely
That's
not.
That's an unfair
This is a
characterization of kids. Yeah.
generational projection.
Absolutely.
You're projecting your anxieties of your generation onto youngsters
Not at all.
because
Absolutely.
this is more of a reflection of your anxieties than the realities on the ground.
I love the beef.
Aren't you all in the same generation or
No,
what?
as a 23-year-old, no.
Please be
can't.
for real. Oh my god.
Okay.
It's getting personal.
It got really heated when Professor Arora started speaking, which surprised me because we all said when we read her bio and stuff that we would love her. But then the way that she was maybe speaking or portraying herself kind of like made the whole room go wow, because we're all from like global south. But I disagree with a lot of her takes because I think she was only focusing on people who are displaced or marginalized or like very deep situations.
I really don't, you know what? If the data said, hey, this is awesome,
it's not about data. Data is
It does not say this.
Data is
Yes, it does.
communication and
No, it doesn't.
of expression and hope and aspiration of the people, young people, majority of whom you have not encountered, you probably never will.
Oh, I've only got data on millions. Millions.
Yes, you know what? You have data on what they feel. They're depressed. Yes, because if you are in Afghanistan, sure, you'll feel depressed. That doesn't mean that social media caused the depression. It's society.
We see
as
it in
a
Western
rule.
countries,
It's easy
too.
to blame social media. You know why? Because then we can ban it. We can say, okay, it's a easy, clean solution. Reforming a society, that's the tough part. Reforming a generation, if I'm a teenager and saying, hey, mom, hey, dad, hey, you of a different generation, can you change your mind about arranged marriage? Or let me work because I'm a woman? Or let me get out and be in these spaces?
She's only assuming positive change, but she's
That's the
forgetting that
thing.
there's negative
Rose-colored
change.
lens, you know?
A lot of it's going to depend on who controls the platforms that you're talking about. Now, there are people, and I know many activists, even teenage activists in India, Afghanistan, Palestine, who are willing to make whatever the necessary compromises are in using one of these crappy platforms in order to still get it out, right? And you can see it. The issue comes in when they lose sight of the fact that these are not public forums. These are private platforms owned by companies that sometimes do what their governments say. Now, I understand the fear is that the arguments about the harms of social media can then be used by authoritarian regimes as excuses to clamp down on positive, potentially revolutionary activity by healthy activists. But the situations we're talking about are so very different.
He keeps cooking. He keeps cooking.
The way a 10-year-old is using TikTok in her bedroom in Alabama is very different than the way an activist may be using YouTube in the rainforest of Brazil.
Exactly. Thank you.
Exactly. Yeah. One gets pushed out, the other.
I would ask the young people listening to this, is there, just to evaluate for themselves, do they experience social media that way? Do the young people who are listening to this conversation, do you see it as the place where you are expressing your true nature, where you are standing up to power, where you are expressing the agency of your generation against systems of control? And if that's what you're doing, keep going.
If you had to sort of sum up what you think this tech is doing to the soul of this generation and what it's doing as it seeds influence to the souls of future generations, you would say what?
It's compromising, in many cases, really fundamental human needs. So it's supposed to connect people, and it can, but it has also coincided with kids not playing outside as much, teens not seeing their friends in person, people not sleeping as much because it can interfere. You know, that technology can interfere with sleep. So you think about just fundamentally, you know, what is really important to us as people. So to be physically and mentally healthy, that hasn't gone well in the era of social media.
That physicality,
Like
exactly.
When I was growing up, you know, in the streets of Doha, you'd see kids playing soccer, like
Thank
football
you.
in the middle of the street.
Exactly,
I never
yes.
see that anymore.
Yeah.
Remember how
Never
packed
see
the
that.
Corniche was?
Exactly. Everyone's on their PlayStation. Everyone is on their phone. And I think she makes a valid point.
much easier for older adults to shift the blame, as they've done in all previous generations, onto something like technology or some other entity that they don't like, rather than accept that adults themselves are responsible.
As a father in my 40s asking about the soul of the kids in the future, am I just a sort of no country for old men curmudgeon here, just worrying in the same way that others have?
Absolutely, yeah. So absolutely, this appears to be a very common thing that happens as we get older, that we, become more and more suspicious of whatever culture that young people are embracing. And for whatever, I don't know if it's because we fear our own death, that we fear that we're losing control over culture, which we are, absolutely. It just seems to be a thing that we have such a struggle to learn from history. We can look back and think that it's so crazy that people in the 80s worried about rock music and Dungeons and Dragons, but this one's different, and inevitably it isn't. And already the data are saying this one is not different.
Okay, so we went there, we're gonna go back here.
The most interesting part of the conversation to me was the sort of, well, do we live in this awful society that's leading people to kill themselves, or is it this social media and stuff that's leading people to kill themselves? And the thing is, social media emerged from the same sick society that we're blaming social media for. Right? So the extent to which social media is a sick, extractive kind of Skinner box of psychological control, leading little rats to hit, children as rats to hit on the pellets to get their dopamine, that's because we were in kind of a desperate end-stage capitalism in America, looking for a way to get exponential growth out of people's frontal lobes. So who do we blame? It doesn't really matter which side we blame. The beauty of being in this vicious feedback loop between, capitalism, social media, and social ills is that you can stop it anywhere along the same lines. You can look at the business models of companies and say, well, how could we have a business model based on revenue rather than growth? And what would that look like? You can go to the kids and teach them media literacy so they understand, how can I have agency in this world? There's so many different places where we can intervene. And I think intervention is part of any healthy system. And that's really what helps trigger the sort of agency that leads to pro-social behaviors, whether they're in the real world or on social media platforms that may even be designed to inhibit your social connection. You can still hack them, as she said. You can still hack them to find the others.
So, Jean, it sounds as if Douglas is sort of now leaning more on the side of the others, a little bit on this issue.
I'm saying that these platforms are built and paid for by people who do not mean us well, and we can't just go, oh no, let's die.
Right.
They're here. We're not getting rid of them. They're here. We're not going to regulate them in any meaningful way, not in America anyway, and not in the West. So what do is strengthen our resilience and our courage and our positivity about how can we move through the world in healthy, pro-social ways toward peace, towards justice, towards agency, rather than, admitting defeat and packing it in.
Jean?
You know what I think the ultimate test is?
Tell me.
What do young people say themselves? They're telling us that they're lonely. They're telling us they're anxious. They're telling us they're depressed.
And they're telling us that social media is the cause. They are out loud.
Meta's own research.
They're not saying that. That is not true.
That's a good note on which to button up this part of it, because they're not quite kids. They're young adults. We've got them listening in, and I'm fascinated. I'm curious to chat to them, but also, have them interact with you later on. So yeah, there's a lot more to say. I know you all have much more to say, and I'm interested in the next dynamic when the students come in and you guys sort of interact with them. So throughout this debate, just to remind you, our panel of students and recent graduates has been carefully listening to your ideas and all of your arguments. Next, I'm going to go next door. I'm going to join them as they reflect and sort of deliberate on what they've just heard. Now, after that discussion, they'll return here with me to share their own perspectives along with questions and challenges.
I thought to myself that I was going to disagree a lot with Professor Twenge, and that's simply because of our difference in approaches. You know, she cares a lot about the kind of the parental aspect of things, how people should raise families to make sure that this doesn't happen. But actually, I realized through the debate that she actually does support kind of regulating social media, having the state come in and, you know, make sure that it's safer for us. And that's actually something that I totally agree with. I thought that that was going to be a point of contention between us. But, you know, I think that was definitely something that I came in not expecting. And, you know, I love the dialogue that came out of that. And by the end of the debate, I think I was fully in agreement with her.
I think in hindsight, although so much of what Professor Arora said I critiqued, I appreciated how she saw social media as a lifeline rather than a threat. Like, I appreciated her showing her perspective.
Are you all talking about social media? Okay, tell me what was the fundamental issue there? What was, if you had to choose one thing that we missed, it would be what?
We spent like this whole time arguing over data and whether an issue even exists in social media or what the issue is.
Do you think it exists?
Absolutely. I think the fact that we have to spend this entire time arguing about data about whether it causes depression. I mean, you know, we heard one of the members of the panel claim that less than 1% of depression can be attributed to social media, which is just a ridiculous, stubborn claim, right?
Because it was a whole data talk. It was just
the reality is if you actually want to approach the topic, we could have been talking about solutions. You know, is it about what the parents do? Should the state get involved? Should we have these restrictions? But instead of doing that, we basically sat there and argued as like, oh well, you know, like my data's right and your data's wrong. And then Professor Arora jump in and go, well, what about India? And then like generalizing the entire global south in the process.
I think, you know, it's the fact that she sort of acted as if she spoke on behalf of all people from the global south, when in reality it was far more complex than that.
I just really want to add that I think Professor Arora lives in 2010 in many ways. I think the Arab Spring, for example, has proven, at least the reaction to it, that states have co-opted social media to repress people. We're no longer living in, it's no longer your father's social media anymore. Now it's something much more nefarious.
I don't think she was debating that per se, but she was talking about your own individual user experience can still have more positives than negatives.
Honestly, yes,
talk about that actually. But she didn't because
so yeah, let's bring Felicia.
I wanted to talk about this because she was saying like put yourself out there, talk about your experiences, but she missed the whole cyberbullying. It's very dangerous to put yourself in a platform because you are exposing yourself to the whole world and people will not agree with you always. Yes, so the reason I mentioned cyberbullying is because I didn't have social media up until 18, right? But I went to a very private school for rich kids with a scholarship and I used to get hella bullied for being poor there and the bullying was horrible. And then I think if I had social media, the bullying would have been worse because now they know my life and now they have like comments and things to like even pile on. And I see this in like other schools in El Salvador. Like I now see girls who are like seeing like celebrities or people here, like they see even me and they're jealous, insecure, and then they start attacking each other. And let's remember, this conversation is social media in childhood. Kids do not have agency right now. They're very heavily influenced. We cannot say, let's give them a platform and okay, let's see what happens. You need to like help them and you cannot just pretend that they actually have agency and know what they're doing.
So there's an operative word, agency. Do kids have agency or not?
I think the problem with the discussion about agency is that it's not solution oriented at all. Let's assume that the agency lies with the parents, okay, to regulate their kids. How are you going to do that? Are you going to walk up to the parents and tell them to do it? Why would they do that? Parents are busy. They have other things to do. They might not do it. Maybe they disagree with you. Maybe they think that social media is fine. Maybe they don't know what their child is consuming.
This is where I would disagree with you.
But instead of blaming individual people and just being like, well, you know, if you want social media to be good, maybe you should just handle it better.
Okay.
I think we should recognize that there's something fundamentally wrong with the way social media operates today and try to fix that instead of assigning blame to individuals.
I think going off of what Amir just said, you know, speaking about agency, when you're talking in the context of like children, especially on social media, is problematic in and of itself because where does parental discernment come into this, right? Like what differentiates an adult from a child during their formative years, right? It's the experience first and foremost, it's the cognitive development, right? You think that, and then, you know, just like Amir said, where does corporate accountability come into all of this? You know, are we placing children against trillion-dollar companies? You know, what power do these children have?
Well, listen, just one sec before anybody jumps in. Soha, you're differentiated between you know, yourself and everybody else here. There's an interesting, different dynamic with you because not only are you a recent grad and a sort of young person as you all are, but you're also an educator.
That's true.
Yes, so you teach small kids.
Yeah, as a teacher who teaches a bunch of sweetheart, like 13-year-olds, you can see the first-hand effects of social media in their retention, in their attention span, and their ability to even grasp information, because they're so used to short-form content, and they're so used to like quick dopamine spikes, right? And then we have to have them take a step back and do something that requires like a lower release of dopamine, or a slower, release of dopamine. They face so much difficulty. It's sometimes practically impossible to get their attention for more than like 5 minutes.
Are you looking forward to talking to Dr. Christopher Ferguson on the dopamine issue?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
Okay, I want to take a little moment to ask you to raise your hands if you've ever taken a break from social media or deactivated your accounts, whichever it is. Basically, Alicia, so this is interesting. This is okay. So two of you have not. Did you all end up going back in some form or
Well, I use
other?
it for work, so I have to. I
Right.
had to go back.
Okay. Now, a lot of that data that they debate over has to do with the issues of mental health, especially young women. I mean, the Jonathan Haidt data and even Jean Twenge's data, a lot of it for them, even though Christopher Ferguson would disagree, centers around young women's mental health. I want to ask the women on this panel here, do you believe that it's a myth or it's something very, very real and it is specifically different to male mental health? Let's give every woman here a chance to
I think
answer
it's so real because I think every time I look at social media, I'm a grown woman, I'm 26-year-old, but every time I see a lady in Instagram who looks hot, has money, has everything, come on, I want to feel insecure. I'm here like battling life, unemployed, sad. Of course, it like bothers me. I feel fat and I feel like they make fun of a lot of things that women go through. Like sometimes I'm in TikTok and I see feminist things. I'm like, wow, this is very interesting. And then you open the comments and they're like, oh, horrible, ugly, like feminists, like they're ruining the world. We will not kill all women. So it really like messes with your mental health. And no matter what you try to do, you can be positive. But as a woman, I feel like I have more hate towards me and I'm more aware of it because of social media.
I appreciate you sharing. Okay, who next wants to go?
If I may,
Yeah, sure,
I
Nada.
think I've said this a lot before. It's something I'm really interested in. Teenagers, they're super, super interesting. Their brains are super fascinating. It's from my studies and what I've learned is that once everybody has hit the age of 13, your self-esteem drops to an all-time low. It does this because the validation that you crave from your mom and from your dad turns into a validation that you crave from your peers, from people that are like you, and then adding social media to that, it's like, okay, well, now you can see what everybody likes and what the trends are and what everyone looks like and what everyone does. And then as a woman, it's like craving validation from a person who you see is ahead of you in a way, or better than you, or whatever it may be, right? It's easier to kind of reason and rationalize these things when we're older because we can think, okay, some of these people's bodies are fake. A lot of people use, editing or whatever. Some people, their money is made from things that we consider immoral or whatever it may be. And so we're able to rationalize these things. But 13-year-olds who are insecure or who, crave validation from other insecure 13-year-olds, it's difficult, especially with women, and women view things like physical appearance as something very important to them, the same way that men view things like social status as something very important. Who has the faster car, who has the cooler watch, who has, it's a difference in what we see as better. But at the end of the day, there's going to be that kind of insecurity when you bring social media into the mix of insecure 13-year-olds.
I can tell you're studying psychology. Lean.
So I definitely agree with most of what Nada mentioned, especially since in today's world, the way the beauty standards are set is way different than back then. Like it got to the point where people use AI to make themselves look better. If it impacts us as grown adults or young adults in like this much, it would impact a child even more. Since the social media that I mainly consume is short form, so like TikTok, Instagram Reels, my attention span is the one that's most impacted. So I feel like when I take a break, especially during exam season, it actually allows me to have a longer span of attention. So even if I take a break from social media, I still have a form of entertainment, which is like watching shows or watching video essays. Watching something that's so consistent for a longer period of time than what I'm used to allowed me to focus for a longer period of time on my studies. Like I don't feel that itch to like, okay, but I need to touch my phone.
I think I can offer a very interesting perspective because between the ages of, let's say, 14 up until 18, I was off of social media. So I wasn't actively engaging with Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, what have you. And so I did notice a drastic difference in the way that I felt within myself and my body and like my appearance as opposed to some of my peers, you know. They would like nitpick certain insecurities that I wouldn't even even begin to think about, right? In terms of appearance, in terms of like body shapes, to the extent where they would use certain terms that I was unfamiliar with because I wasn't on the internet, or they'd find like a new like
Insecurity
body
every
part or like
time, yeah.
insecurity to critique every other week. You know, be it like, oh, I don't have hollow cheeks and I don't have a thigh gap, and these key terms that were like completely foreign to me as a person who was off of those apps.
Social media have literally made people break their bones and shape them. There are so many communities that are literally just made to motivate women into looking a specific way or losing a specific weight. And it's not just those direct communities. It's simply because women want to be desired and we want to be validated. It is completely fine to acknowledge that.
Right. Okay. Wahed, let's switch to the XY chromosome here. I mean, there's clearly also a problem, but it seems to be different. Tell me how different it is.
For me, I feel like it's completely different. So when it comes to aesthetics, it does exist in men. There's the Giga Chad, there's Alpha,
The gym
Beta,
bros.
Sigma, the gym bros, which I was a part of.
Shout out.
Happens.
Were you an influencer or
I was
a
not an
follower?
influencer.
Oh.
So this is interesting, you know,
Yeah.
because when it comes to me and my brother, we were kind of easily influenced. So there was a time when I watched Andrew Tate and I was like, oh my God, this guy makes sense. You know, he gets me. But now that I'm older, I've realized everything he's saying is so basic, isn't like it's targeted towards kids, and this is why it's bad. And these people, they say these things, but they're so fake. There was an influencer, I'm not gonna say who it was, who mentioned that you should be natural, you should love yourself. No matter how you are, you should say, you know, I'm happy with how I am. But this person now that has achieved fame and money, he's gone through surgery to make himself look much better.
Young men are being increasingly radicalized by social media, right? So, you know, the influence of the manosphere, you also see, you know, the rise of pornography and sexual content on social media has also led to the objectification, the sexualization of women. So, you know, you see, you know, on comments and whatever, you see like a particularly disgusting type of misogyny that kind of comes out in men when they have access to social media. And it's because of the influence of these sorts of people, right?
That's fascinating. Yeah, but because that whole point that was made earlier on, I think by Lean, which was like, if adults are struggling, then what about the kids? And I've seen so many people who start off in a sort of healthy way as influencers, and they become audience captured, and they become caricatures of themselves because they're sort of feeding
For the
beast,
money.
right? For the money, right? So, I mean, I don't know, Hussein, in that sense, is there an inevitability to this thing? Like, the more you engage with it, and maybe even the bigger a person is on there, it's like a downward slope towards, I don't know, disaster.
I'm going to take a completely different approach over here. There is a lack of family structure right now. There is a lack of connection between families and their kids. And this is a huge problem because even if you do not have social media, you're going to still have the lack of connection between families and kids. Now, how does social media play into this? If I'm a person that does not spend time with my families, I don't have any sort of relative traits or boundaries that I need to compare as the ones that my parents taught me with the ones that are there on social media, and then choose which is better for me.
Okay, so then, who here disagrees with that? That the fact that it comes down to the family and the sort of the foundation that you have at home, and then you'll sort
But why
things
does
out.
can it be like a binary? Because it doesn't have to be like agree and disagree.
Yeah,
right?
I feel there's a lot of factors, and that's not just one thing.
I think that the best governance is actually via what the founders called the laboratories of democracy, in which we have policies tested out on the local level. For example, say schools banning phones, and if schools banning phones, families buying their kids dummy phones, basically the idea that phones are not, you're not calling them on that phone, you're using social media, for example. You're not using social media, but you're only using it to call your parents. And then over time, because those policies actually work, we've seen empirical evidence that these policies make their students perform better in school, and they're not as socially asocial as in the status quo. They can be expanded later on, but a top-down banning is not going to work. I don't really think it can work. This is like China, for example.
Honestly, amongst my peers, I was agreeing the most with Raed, but I was a bit more on an extreme level, to be honest with you. I do believe that family is the first source where you can actually have some sort of boundaries and limitations on how kids consume social media.
I'm gonna challenge you even more on this because, like, yes, it might work in schools, but still at the end of the day, you're only paying attention in school. But as soon as you go back, because you're like deprived of this sort of privilege for a while, as soon as you
start
go back,
seeking it out more.
yeah, you seek it out more. Like, I honestly do not see any sort of involvement of the state into this, because the characteristics of social media makes it very difficult for you to actually ban. Because at the end of the day, even if you put a ban, you always have the I'm 18 plus check, or even if you try, as you said, like the only way it was working in schools is that when they banned the whole phone, the whole source of social media. But then in this case, for you to have like a child that is working perfectly fine, you will have to ban it for almost majority of the day, and then take it away, and then give it to him for a certain time. So it's not the state; it's more about
Okay,
the
but
family.
can I push back on you, Hussein? I feel pure frustration in that moment, because I feel like my mind goes to like, this is so dismissive. Because I understand, like in a lot of places, it looks good, like mom, dad, or like a core family looks good in the outside. But why are you being so dismissive to other like social structures that can help? And it sounds even more offensive to me as a person who grew up without parents. Does that mean that maybe I will not have the same outcomes, or that I cannot use social media the same way that other people who have parents do? You are putting a lot of responsibility on parents. I understand they can teach you values, and that's very important, okay? But when you grow up, you also feel pressure from other people, from your friends, from or whoever. But also, a lot of parents are not competent. They do not understand social media. Maybe the younger parents might be, but older parents, like my aunt, my grandma, they have no idea what I'm doing. They can tell me like, hey, don't go around and do this and that. But I could be in Instagram doing God knows what, selling drugs, and they will never know what I'm doing and how I'm doing it.
As a parent, I should not understand social media to teach my kids how to deal with social media.
Okay, no, but they can teach you values.
As a parent, I teach you the right values that are there within our culture, religion.
But kids will never follow the
But if you
values of
never
their
buy
time.
your kids a phone, then why would they use social media? This is what I'm saying. I think parents should not be buying their kids phones. I see no reason why kids should be having
there's always
phones.
a way around.
They
You
will
can use
be
the
isolated
laptop,
if you
can
don't
use your friend's
like
phone.
Dummy
like,
phones.
Yeah,
You can call your friends your dad. That's it. They exist nowadays.
But I think it's worth unpacking. Riot mentions bad parenting. Well, bad parenting doesn't happen through a vacuum, right? There's structural systems in place that force parents, or they have no choice but to bad parent. If a parent is overworked, or if a parent handles a few jobs and stuff, they have no choice but to pacify them kids with these devices, right? Their kids are seeking out entertainment at the end of the day. So when all their peers at school have access to phones, are you going to isolate your child?
This is the issue.
So this is why something like this has to come from the society, from community.
The structural issue is that you should not work with a structural issue from the government. It's about a structural issue of the entire community around. Because as I'm right now a young adult, if I ever become a parent, I don't want to completely ban my kid from the phone, because I know they will get bullied because they don't understand the trends that are happening.
They're ostracized, yeah.
Take one example of somebody using social media in a very particular oppressive context under persecution. Bisan in Gaza using social media.
Hey everyone, this is Bisan from Gaza. I am still alive in the day 472 of the genocide.
Is anybody here going to say that that's a problem?
No, context does matter. It's definitely very important. And there is a difference when we talk about giving a 5-year-old, in the United States, a middle-class home, like working parents, social media or access to the internet, versus, someone like Bisan, who is a journalist on the ground, like going through the horrific genocide of the people of Gaza. Like, there's a difference.
I think that also another problem is the extreme monopoly happening, with companies like Meta, Instagram, Threads trying to control every format there is. And what happens, something we didn't talk about, is also the policy behind it. These companies, they're a lot of times a reflection of US foreign policy. And a lot of times that's problematic, especially with what's happening today. We have outright seen them hiring a person responsible for Israeli affairs and pushing Israeli propaganda and silencing people from the global south through all those algorithmic suppression that we have talked about. And I think this with time is becoming more problematic. This is going beyond profit. This is becoming a way for them to control the narrative with the billions of users they have access to.
And with that in mind, are we sort of slaves or pets to this algorithm? Have we stripped our society and human interaction, have we stripped it of meaning?
I think 100%. Like back in the day, social media was a good thing. And then as time went on, these companies went public, like Meta went public back in 2010 and all these things. When this happened, these companies went from connecting people to now making more money. And all these social media companies are all about money and getting people not connected, but in a way, they're trying to divide everyone into these subgroups. and trying to profit off each single group. So now what my wish is to see a new startup or a new social media platform that focuses on actually connecting people and getting rid of the whole money
So
system.
breathing a spirit of meaning into what already is there. There's a whole other part to this and a really exciting conversation to be had with the experts that you guys have referenced and you listened to, and I know it fired you up as well. Are you guys ready to meet the panelists? You want to follow me? Let's go. Let's go. Let's go.
I really enjoyed our discussion because I felt like it was very well-rounded, very well-versed, a very comprehensive discussion. There's so many aspects of social media that we touched on, from like family dynamics to tech oligarchs to extractive algorithms. You know, it was a very fruitful discussion.
I think I'll double down on the childhood point. Since it was really overlooked, I'll probably talk about that. About how we're targeting children, how they're being exploited, and the way that they're being exploited, so like how it's taken advantage of both from the side of the companies, let's say, and from the side of the parents, because here they're talking about parents a lot, so I just want to bring that up. I feel like that would be important for the discussion.
The only thing that I see is that people have a problem with the systems around social media, not social media. And this is something that I like, my opinions talk even more on it. It's not social media. Like, all of the problems that we had out there, problems that are related to the family, related to the structure, related to how we are as humans materialistic. And I do agree that social media kind of boosted the idea of this materialistic mentality, and we need to own this, have this look. But at the end of the day, it's something that is within the community that if we actually fix, social media won't be able to boost it. So that social media is always a catalyst, if I may say, but at the end of the day, a catalyst will never be able to complete the whole reaction without having the components at the start.
Okay, amazing. Now we've had an amazing discussion up front. And then I went in there and the students were phenomenal, you guys. Looking forward to you guys challenging each other and maybe trying to see where you guys agree as well. Something that came to mind, Jean Twenge, as I was talking to the students, they argued from a very personal perspective. And of course, you guys are professors, academics, you come armed with data. And I wondered, Jean, is this personal for you? I mean, do you know someone, for example, who struggles, who suffers, who has suffered as a result of social media addiction or technology hurting them?
I came to this in seeing the really alarming rise in depression among teens and just trying to figure out what was causing it. I certainly have seen some of the effects because I do have 3 teenage children. They were very young when I first started doing this research, and it really wasn't something that was affecting them at that point. But I think it is important to recognize some of the really terrible outcomes that have happened that are extreme, but they really do illustrate some of the dangers of these platforms.
Douglas Rushkoff, is this personal for you?
I do have a daughter who's now 20, and people would always ask me, because I'm supposed to be a media expert, what are you doing? How are you doing? And I'm just going to let her just deal with it, just be in it. I'm not going to try to shield her from it. And I did watch in high school, later high school, as she would see where her friends were. She would see them sending photos from the party that she wasn't at in real time, overnight. And I realized that we haven't yet developed socially in pace with these devices.
Right.
And
okay.
There's a lot of pain that I've seen as a result.
We haven't caught up with the pace of the tech. Interesting. Payal, Arora, again, before we go to the students, is this personal for you?
Absolutely. And for me, unlike, I guess, the others, I am an anthropologist. Part of anthropology is you go into cultures that you have perceptions of, and it corrects you in many ways and complicates it. So basically, the line, it's complicated, it really is, because I am not at all denying these actual real harms. Absolutely not. But for me, it's become a moral imperative to be hopeful and optimistic, because I'm constantly, over the last 2 decades, right, being reminded by users who are in precarious conditions. And it wasn't that they were not going through hardships
Right.
too, by the way. This is not like everything was perfect, like, oh my God, this digital had opened up this utopic space. No, they got heartbreaks, they had deceptions happen to them, but then they also sought communities online. So it's like, who has something pure? I'm just saying that it's a very critical alternative space because they were so isolated.
Right.
You know, so it absolutely is personal, you know?
Christopher Ferguson, I'm looking at your tie and I see a controller on there.
It is video game controllers, yeah.
And you mentioned Dungeons and Dragons earlier on. Is this personal for you?
Well, I feel social pressure to say yes now at this point. But I actually think probably like my deeper interest in this is probably more from the clinical realm, you know, where I've done work with Child Protective Services in Texas when I was there, and did a lot of work with juvenile delinquents and juveniles who are in psychiatric hospitals, and you know, so these are kids who had the most distress essentially you possibly could, and issues around tech were important for exactly zero of them. You know, the issues were always their families. You know, there were problems with their families. Their parents were not involved. Their parents were abusive. In some cases, they had their own mental health problems, and so on and so forth. So that was the common thread I saw clinically.
I see Hussein nodding in agreement now. Just open it up. Let's go.
So I think we already had this argument. I genuinely believe that majority of the issues are family when it comes to this. Like when we were talking about the systematic issues that come with social media, I believe that social media is something that's good, but any sort of abuse for any system is bad, right? And what is happening right now amongst teenagers and kids is that we're abusing the system of social media and these platforms, right? And very interestingly, when you were talking about like your daughter, you said you just let her deal with social media and discover it. Why did you choose to let her deal with social media and discover it rather than have some sort of control that allows you to understand how she's thinking and also like build her own boundaries to be able to sort of have a comparative analysis between what's bad on social media and what should be good? And as a daughter as well, like, and we heard this from majority of the ladies, like there's always this comparative between like social media influencers and the whole concept of insecurity. So don't you think like as a father, it's important to give her this sort of like support and confidence to be able to just not have these insecurities from influencers and be able to have comparative analysis on that?
Yeah, I mean, we probably spent half hour to an hour a day talking about social media, probably more than most parents do. It wasn't influencers that upset her. It wasn't, I mean, she worked for an influencer for a while. It was more, the issues that came up for her were more social issues that didn't exist in my day because her awareness of what people were doing was greater. So where we would have arguments, but I didn't, by the time she was in 10th grade or 11th grade, I didn't make decrees about how she could use her social media, but she would see the locations of other kids and she would see them, but I wasn't able with her, and she didn't have a psychotherapist. I wasn't capable of helping her metabolize the upset of seeing a whole bunch of kids going into a house, you know, and her not being invited and her not being able to get herself invited. It was it seemed to magnify. I knew what it was like not to be invited to a party in high school, but I never had to physically sort of watch it happen and see the photos come out from this party. It was more, I'd hear about it the next day, so no, I don't feel I had the social psychological tools on how to bring her up to speed on that level of awareness.
So, Professor Ferguson, I want to actually pivot towards what you said earlier about juvenile delinquents. And, you know, in many ways, I can agree with you that I think the family is very important here. I think social media isn't the primary cause, but don't you think social media kind of amplifies these problems anyways? Like, for example, suicidal ideation or depression or opioid abuse, right? Don't you think social media, even if it's not the kind of the primary variable here, don't you think it kind of like amplifies these problems in a way that, you know, we still need to address it?
Yeah, great questions. So yeah, I can talk a little bit about the evidence on like what seems to be causal in terms of juvenile delinquency, because we went through this big thing with video games. Like video game violence was like the big thing prior to social media. There's lots of talk about like school shooters and all this kinds of stuff. And it turned out, for instance, that mass homicide perpetrators on average consume fewer violent video games than other males of their age. So there were a lot of like people had a lot of intuitions about what might cause something. And I think that's happening now in the social media debate. Like with your question, it sounds like you have an intuition about what might be a factor in mental health for teenagers as well. So with juvenile delinquency, what you generally find is a mixture of genes, so genetic factors, explains about 50% of the variance in juvenile delinquency. And the rest are what we call unshared variants. So it's basically other things like stress that happens to them in their environment. So being in poverty, having a lack of a father figure, so on and so forth. As for things like video games or social media, yeah, I mean, the hypothesis is a good one. I mean, it's not a bad hypothesis to ask. The question then is, do we see the data? And this is where there's debates. Obviously, Gene feels very differently than I do about what the data says. But I would say, no, the data really don't explain. Like literally, the studies that I've done and other people have done say that time spent on social media does not predict, these outcomes.
I've heard this a lot from your points, Doctor. You focus specifically on suicide, right? Like the thing is, I think obviously I did not find a study that directly linked it, but I found a lot of studies that directly linked social media use to depression. PBS NewsHour, they had the scholar that was talking about a recently, just finished study that was supported by the NIH, where they tracked over 12,000 teens' usage of social media. And one of the biggest indicators that they found were that a lot of it increased to the likelihood of depression. Depression does not increase social media, but social media use increases the likelihood of depression. 12,000 kids were monitored over a long period of time. So the thing is, I just don't understand why are we directly focusing on suicide as the direct result of these issues? Because the thing is, depression surely, and all of these mental illnesses surely lead to a lot of things, including suicide.
Yeah.
But it already shows that there is a link to danger, right? And we can agree on that, right?
Well, I wouldn't agree with you, actually. Yeah. So there actually are a number of studies that look at this issue. Some do find some small effects, some find no effects, and some find even that social media is beneficial for these types of outcomes. So you have to kind of look at the studies in combination with each other. So there's a little bit of statistical inside baseball, but essentially what they found was a near zero correlation. So I don't know where
So if I go on PBS NewsHour and
Yeah.
I listen to it, and they say that there is a very strong correlation.
Yeah. Well, you had the part of the answer in what you said. It said there were 12,000 participants in that study.
Yes.
It's a statistical anomaly that when you have large samples, almost everything becomes statistically significant. Almost, like literally, I know there's been
So what's the correct sample size?
Well, wait, but how do you define small, first of all? Plus, what study has ever shown that the heaviest social media users are the least depressed? None. Zero. And I think the other thing we have to acknowledge that I think is really important.
That's actually not true. But no, it's not true. It's not true.
Yes.
Everyone you say there's
Okay,
a totalizing
hold on.
thing like zero,
Please
that is
let me
absolutely
finish.
not true.
You can't go to a bunch of youth and be like, you are having a moral panic. Whatever emotions or whatever opinions you have, they are just moral panic. You are panicking right now.
The U.S. Surgeon General says that there is harm. He reviewed all of it. His staff reviewed all of this literature and says studies like what you're talking about, that is what most of the literature shows.
No, it is not. That is not accurate.
That is what
National
that
Academy of
report
Sciences actually looked at the same body of
That's
research.
a whole other discussion.
This is the problem with
Let
this
me
field,
finish
right?
this.
So just a second. So just a second. I want to bring Felicia in.
Yeah,
and
so
you'll
I
have a moment.
understand about how you have data that says that maybe social media is not correlated, but I think sometimes you are glossing over that there's as Dr. T said, young women are being impacted, and maybe because you're not a woman or a young woman out there, you might not see that this is actually impactful. And so I wanted to go back to Dr. T. I saw that, I agree with you, restrictions are necessary, mostly for very young children or even young adults. And I wanted to ask, how do you want to put these restrictions? Which age should we allow to, or should we expose them slowly? And if who should restrict? Should it be parents or the state?
That's a great question. You're right. The risks are higher in most studies for younger teens, which makes perfect sense. And the risks are also higher for girls than for boys. That's also been found over and over. So the age question, I think, is really, really crucial. Because are we ever going to get something passed that says, hey, all you adults out there, you can only spend 2 hours a day on social media? Of course not. We trust adults to make their own choices. This is why we have age gating for things like alcohol and driving and voting. And I and many others are starting to say, hey, maybe we should have the same for social media as well. So where exactly you draw that line, is a matter of debate. I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb and suggest that most of the panel, even with our disagreements, would agree that 7 and 8-year-olds should probably not be on social media. So where I and many others have settled is 16. So the law right now in the US is 13, and in many other countries. I think you'd be very hard-pressed to find any parent, developmental psychologist, or teacher who would say 13, right at the beginning of puberty, that is the best time to introduce social media. I mean, particularly for girls, but for boys too. It's just not a good time. And those 3 years between 13 and 16, you get a lot of maturity. There are some people who might argue 18 because that's legal adulthood. What other contract can you sign other than with a social media company to give away all of your personal data when you're not a legal adult? Other than that one, it's the only one. But 16 is a nice compromise because there are, as Payal was talking about, some of these things about getting involved in a community, political activism, that allows 16 and 17-year-olds to do that. And they've matured more, they have more self-control. As to your question about who should do it, so parents, but you're right, the parental controls are really hard to figure out. And you have to have time and resources to be able to do that. And not everybody has those. Plus, then there's the argument that you'll get from your kid, everybody else is doing it. But mom, everybody else has social media. My own children have said that. And many, many parents have had that experience. So that's why I and others such as John Haidt have started to say, hey, maybe we need more regulation. Because if your 7th grader, who's 12 years old, can't come home from school and say, but everybody else is on social media at 12, what a relief that would be to parents to not have that social pressure of all of these very young children being on these platforms.
She was like very honest and really caring about the childhood. She only focused on kids, which I felt like it was being like washed out in the conversation.
Look, what's really concerning me right now is that after spending 2 decades, and I focus particularly on young girls and women in the global south, particularly in precarious contexts, but that's a majority, okay? And there's already a, double gendered punishment. One is just by being a woman. In most societies in the world today, you tend to be at a disadvantage. There are guardianship systems, there's like access, patriarchal systems in all forms of ways. And then you have the digital. So there's a double divide, right? And you can see the stats that women and girls are declining in their usage uptake, right? Because they see not just particular social media apps, they see the internet is not for them. And we have the stats to prove this. And so what I'm grappling with is that what happens when we invest in this fear of the social media is that it is going to disproportionately impact girls and women because parents don't want to let their girls be subjected to harms. So what I'm trying to do is, okay, look, I understand the harms that women disproportionately are facing, particularly in the global south. We need to reclaim this because it is a critical public space. The digital
I would contest
space.
this framing, of global north versus global south when we talk about social media. I'm very upfront. I'm not afraid to kind of, give my opinion on things. Professor Arora, you've largely been talking about, India and China, but the reality is that's not all the global south either, right? So, we're talking
Ethiopia and a few other countries as well.
I've worked a long term in Brazil. I've also spoken about the UNHCR project. I've worked in Namibia for 4 years.
All across the world,
I have done a lot of research in very different contexts, and so I did bring that up.
Can we agree that she hasn't just spoken about India and
No,
China?
Professor, I think the more interesting point here is
hold on.
Okay.
So,
I'll let you finish
back to the framing. I disagree with the idea that people in the global south largely just, think that social media is a good thing. I think, from my experience...
It's not a personal opinion. We have statistics by BBC over a decade, documenting. So I understand you have a personal opinion, but we have statistics across countries documenting public sentiment towards these, towards digital media, towards the climate crisis, towards, as I mentioned.
As we've already established, it's clear that experts can't always agree on what the data constitutes. But
yes, but
you know,
you're not coming up with a counter statistical interpretation, right?
I realize I catch myself doing the thing where I'm trying to lead someone down a logical path.
So first off, I think lots of people in this room have already acknowledged that, I mean, every single one of us is from the global south. And lots of us have already acknowledged the fact that actually, no, lots of our families, our parents do think that social media is incredibly harmful. Lots of us think that social media is incredibly harmful, right? I'm from Iraq. Most of my family thinks that social media is incredibly harmful. And I would argue that that's actually the dominant opinion, right? And then the other thing that you're forgetting to mention, I mean, you've been talking about how people, you know, are empowered by social media. And while that's absolutely true, you're also ignoring the fact that, I mean, even in your own home country of India, right, you have social media being used as a tool of political radicalization. So let's think about how people are radicalized on the internet, how Muslim lynchings in India, how, you know, the genocide against Rohingya in Myanmar are all, you know, being exacerbated by social media algorithms that help to radicalize people. Let's think about how, you know, young men on the internet are, you know, indoctrinated into misogynistic ideologies, are indoctrinated to far-right ideologies. You know, in places like South Korea and Germany, we're seeing that, you know, men and women are more politically polarized than ever.
Okay,
And
so you've given a few examples now.
The fact that we are all here itself talking in English, right? We have so many privileges, right? And so this is what keeps me checked, because I work with refugees over, you know, for 2 years in Brazil, Venezuelan refugees that to me have like lost everything. I can't even imagine why would they be excited or hopeful. I'm talking about the precarious majority. And guess what? They are the majority world because of the growing inequalities that have been, you know, that we've been facing, and the gender violence that have been that we've been facing. And there's multiple
the gender violence promoted by social media, to be clear.
It's not promoted. It's promoted by sticky cultures that refuse to get away because it is perpetuated in our mainstream media. Nobody's denying that it has the potential for, you know, tremendous harm, but it also has enabled the Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter, many, many activist movements that also are using similar algorithms,
but then,
right?
But then I can say the reverse, right? I can acknowledge the good, but then realize that no, something fundamentally needs to change about the way we approach social media.
I don't think her answer was particularly strong. I think it failed to kind of address a lot of what I was talking about, especially the point about radicalization. I think that was something that, you know, she wasn't really able to address because, as she admitted, Global South countries don't tend to have the capacity or aren't willing to regulate social media companies. So when you have social media in the South being in the Global South being used that way in India and Myanmar and other countries, then I mean, how can you possibly argue that it's, you know, like this thing that provides opportunities for oppressed people when actually it can further oppression in many ways?
When you say youth, yes, it does help empower them. Yes, it does help allow them a platform to speak and voice their opinions. Actually, here, Professor Arora hit the nail when she said that it does help with empowering youth. Even if I'm not someone that posts actively and advocates on social media, I could still see other kids my age or other students or people my age that do that. And I feel like it's very impactful.
Throughout this whole discussion, or this debate, I think of this quote by Ian Wilson, a sociologist. He says, we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. And I think essentially that's what it is.
Say it again, slowly.
Paleolithic emotions.
Paleolithic emotions.
Medieval institutions.
Medieval institutions.
Godlike technology.
Godlike technology.
Because when Hussein posed a question to Professor Rushkoff about, so why is it that you don't control like your daughter's phone usage? And he said, well, there's some stuff that, you know, when she's capable of saying where her friends are, you know, when they attend a party that she's not invited to, that sort of awareness or being exposed to that extent of people's lives is something that's just been engineered into those apps, you know. And I think fundamentally, those tech oligarchs are at fault. You know, they're the ones that should have people's interests at the forefront of their.
I want to ask Douglas Rushkoff, because you've sat in rooms with them. So some people love them, admire them. Some people hate them because they're billionaires or whatever. You've sat in rooms with them while they're preparing for the apocalypse, right?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about those tech oligarchs, and again, to the point of should we be trusting them with all this power?
I mean, not all of them, but the tech oligarchs that I know see the planet and the human race as fuel for their own escape from this place. They sort of follow a eugenicist's model of the world, and they see us human beings as in the larval stage of the species. And they are going to be transhuman or posthuman and sprout the wings and get off the planet, while the rest of us, as the maggots, will stay behind on the piece of dung. So if they need to extract the resources, whether they're physical resources from the planet or emotional or psychic resources from the population, so be it, as long as some of us get off. And they see this as altruistic, ultimately, because the species will die. You look at any ant colony, and they have scouts that get to the next place, and they see themselves as doing that, which is why they need to get as much deregulation, as many power plants as necessary to power the AIs and build the rockets and solve the problems and move on.
Professor, on that, because you talk a lot about how these tech oligarchs are maybe immoral in your eyes, and I would argue maybe the same, right? I don't think these oligarchs are perfectly moral. I think they're working their self-interest, and I think as everyone else does. But do you think that the state should go the other direction and kind of target these companies and break them up, and kind of, even if they're not actually monopolies on paper, do you think the state should channel those powers anyway to break up those companies and actually take away power from Zuckerberg and Elon Musk?
I don't have a lot of faith, just because maybe I'm an American, I don't have a lot of faith in the ability of government to do regulation anymore. So I'd take a much more almost a homeopathic perspective on it. So how do we as people increase our immune response to this stuff? How do we teach our kids? How do we teach in schools how to recognize disinformation or how not to trust certain things? It's a longer, harder road. But rather than from the top down trying to protect kids from stuff, I mean, I'll do that as much as I can, but it's really more a matter of teaching kids, their own kung fu.
We haven't heard from Lean as well. And when we went in there, you said that we sort of missed the essence of the debate in our first chapter, in our first act. After this, Lean, do you feel that we've now grabbed the bull by the horns and
No.
No? Again? Should we go for another hour? Tell me.
I mean, I'll say it very briefly what I had in mind or what I expected out of this debate in general. Because, the key word here is childhood. So we're talking about children with very important development that are going through very important developmental stages of their life. So what they see matters a lot. We're not talking about the youth. We're not talking about people that can make change. We're not talking about people our age. We're talking about children here. Children who suddenly have access to social media. A lot of children have access to it to the point where there's even child influencers that influence these children. So the way I thought about it was that, okay, now we're talking about technologies. How is it not benefiting children from my point of view? We can say that technology is helpful from educational purposes because now it's elevated their ability and accessibility, especially in marginalized communities where they don't really have access to educators specifically. So like in Palestine, they use their laptops, they use whatever connectivity they have to be able to keep up with school. However, when you're talking about social media specifically, they can be very taken advantage of, especially with their childhood taken away from them. Because first of all, companies themselves, not that I say that I have moral obligations to care for these children. They're a for-profit company, and it's unrealistic of us to expect them to regulate or limit their audience when their point is to make more money by getting more people into it. Who are these more people? The children. Duh. So, how are they being taken advantage of? Firstly, when they're looking at the trends and insecurities that the people our age are dealing with, from a young age, they're going to start developing these insecurities. From a young age, they're going to start being impacted by it. They're going to think that there's something wrong with them when they don't have the same possibilities or the same features. And on top of that, from another perspective is that when parents themselves exploit their children for content, they make parents supervise accounts using their children, recording them for content, whatever it may be. Maybe it's lighthearted content, however, it can be fetish as well. But at the end of the day, they're exploiting their children to make content, to make money out of them. And that's the point of the debate. Okay. It's about children.
Oh, and it's a big important part of it. And I'm glad you got to say it, especially to our panelists here. Now, as I say, time is our enemy. We have heard some bold claims, hard truths, and deeply personal reflections. I appreciate that you all have engaged with dignity, respectfully, challenged each other. This is good. And our conversation has sort of come full circle. So now, speakers, you've shared your vision, and students, you've shared your perspectives, and it's created an interesting synthesis over here. I want to go to each one of the speakers now, and I want to ask if you've changed your mind on anything, or if there's anything that you've heard from the students upon their reflections, on their arguments.
Actually, from them, I'm very encouraged because my work has never been. I'm not liked in the academic world in general.
I'm not like the other academics.
Yeah,
guys.
I kind of well because I don't have real research, but I have like lots of heart. So I'm kind of trying to move through the world intuitively and to just somehow, maybe with academics, justify that kind of heart-centered approach to things. And what I do sense in you, what I feel in you, is that you're developing your compass rather than external data sets, that you're actually developing your sensibilities. And I feel like our sensibilities are how we're going to be able to navigate this next terrain. It's by doubling down, by leaning into our humanity.
Okay, Christopher Ferguson, have you learned anything from this? Have you changed your mind about anything?
Really intense emotions around this issue.
Have you changed your mind about it?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, it has been a great debate. I appreciate everything you all have said. Obviously, I agree with some and disagree with others in a sense. I mean, I think a few things struck out. I mean, I made a joke about the emotionality of it, but I'm hearing the raw emotion from a lot of people here. And the one thing I kind of want to say about that is when we think about things like techno-panics or moral panics, that's exactly the tone you see. So the sense that I don't need data in order to have my opinion, or there's this innocent childhood that people need to return to that never actually existed. That's exactly how this sort of thing works.
We don't really always agree on the data, so
yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
not really sure that.
But when people kind of make decisions from this position of emotionality and fear, they make horrible mistakes.
I'd love to reflect on I enjoyed hearing everything that the students had to say. It was extremely informative to hear your points of view. I'll pick up on just two that were really striking to me. I want to note that the point about lived experience and the anger here and what young adults have to say about their experiences on social media, that shows why it's not a moral panic. Because a moral panic, Dr. Ferguson said this earlier, is older people criticizing what young people do. This is young people themselves pointing out these problems. Okay. And I also loved what you had to say about childhood. That's what it's really about, is what are we going to do for our children and the experience that they have growing up in those very, very important stages. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay.
And I disagree.
What a shock.
We disagree with you like 10 times more.
One of the things that I was just reflecting on listening to all of you is what's very nice is that you're not pessimistic. You're actually angry. Like it's visceral. And I think that's really good because this anger, our generation tends to be more pessimistic, but your generation and maybe even younger than you are and that anger getting rechanneled because you're not also anger in a sense like randomly, you're informed with your anger.
This was spirited and informed. Now we've explored bold ideas, we've challenged all these assumptions, we've opened space for understanding, a lot of disagreement, but we've had respect and curiosity at the center, and I'm grateful for that. The conversation does not end here though. Now it's your turn. What do you think? You can share your thoughts, your questions, your perspectives. We're listening.
First, I thought, if anything, I was going to agree with Professor Ferguson more than Professor Arora, but I think in the end that I was so surprised to hear, suddenly near the end, where everyone was like, oh wow, you are all very angry and upset. I think I heard that from Ferguson and Professor Arora. No, I was just passionate, right? I mean, we're talking about literally the future of generations and how using social media is going to impact my kids and everyone's kids.
One of the big problems was, and I believe Dean brought this up, which was that we continue to talk about people basically at the end of their childhood. In addition to that, there's also the issue of what about literally little children? And I think we were kind of missing the human element there. I mean, here we are telling you our stories the way we think that we're impacted by social media. You may think that this is another moral scare or moral panic, but moral panics usually come from the older generations. Young people are scared about social media. They know that it's bad for you. I mean, we're the ones who invented the term doom scroll.